Good evening. It is time for your midweek check-in and challenge. Now here we are as Americans. We're coming off the heels of this COVID-19 thing. Much of America is moving back to a more quote unquote normal place. And so I want to remind you that during this whole time of COVID-19, when we were quarantined and everything was different, something that I heard people say a lot was, "Well, I just want to get back to normal. I just want life to return to normal." And I want to remind you of two thoughts tonight. One is this: during the time that you were quarantined, or everything was just kind of different during difficult times in our life, when things are life's interrupted and things are different. It's often when God chooses to speak to us and to grow us and to make us think about things because we sit down long enough to actually hear Him and listen. Sometimes that's what it takes. But one thing I hope we don't do as Americans is forget about what we learned during that time and just go back to quote unquote life as normal. The other challenge I want to give you tonight is to think about this. Again, I had repeatedly heard that I just can't wait to get back to normal. And I still hear people say that. I just want to get back to normal because things aren't quite normal yet. And I've said that myself before. But I want to use that as just sort of a launching pad to remind us as Christians, you shouldn't be normal. You should not look normal. And so I'm going to give you, this is Webster's dictionary definition of normal. It's conforming to a type, standard, or regular pattern. So when it comes to us as people, it's conforming to what is regular. It's doing what the majority of people do. That's the norm. Now, as Christians, we should not be people that just fall in line and do what the rest of the world does. We should be people that think critically and that do things differently. And if there's one thing I want you to know, it's simply that, not just to fall in line, to ask instead, what does God's Word say about every topic under the sun? Because I believe God speaks to everything that we need spoken to as humans and about the human condition. And so it's interesting to me that people want to be normal, and the reason people want to be normal is because it's what's accepted, right? Think back to when you were a kid. If you dressed like everybody else, you want to dress like everybody else so you fit in. You don't want to talk differently. You want people to like you. You want, if somebody else goes there and that's what the crowd's doing, that's what you want to do. That's what we do as teenagers, as kids, because we want to fit in. We want to be normal. I'd love to say that changes for adults, but it just doesn't. Often adults do what everybody around them does because that is the norm. Have you ever seen that study? It's like a bunch of people are sitting in a room waiting on a doctor appointment. And everybody in the room is aware of what's going on, but this one person who walks in for a doctor's appointment isn't. So she's the person that they're doing the experiment on. Well, in the middle of the whole thing, every time there's a beep, everybody in the room stands up, and she just kind of looks like, "Why are y'all standing up?" And so the second time it happens, she stands up. And this goes on and on and on. She has no idea why she's standing up. She's doing it because everybody else does. It's so typical because we want to be like the people around us, and we don't want to, rock the boat or make waves. We want to appear normal. But Dave Ramsey, who I'm a big fan of because he has helped a lot of people find financial freedom, he says normal stinks. And I would agree with him. Normal is completely broken. And so I want to give you some statistics on what normality is in the United States. What's normal when it comes to marriage? Well, 50% of all marriages end in divorce. That's the norm. That's normal. 41% of all first marriages end in divorce. 60% of all second marriages end in divorce. 73% of all third marriages end in divorce. In America, there is a divorce every 13 seconds. That's the norm. Make a commitment. If it doesn't work out or if times get too hard, I can find somebody else, and you go find somebody else. And unfortunately, it's even in the church. Just to pick on our denomination, 29% of Baptists have experienced divorce. Now, I'm not saying that just because you've experienced divorce that you're a horrible, no good person. Well, no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying this is the norm. This is what life looks like around us. So maybe as Christians, we should figure out, how to not be normal. What about when it comes to sexuality? Well, research shows that only 3% of people wait until marriage to have sexual relations. That is the norm. So 97% of people will have sex before they're ever married. 7 out of 10 people struggle with pornography. 7 out of 10 men struggle with pornography, I should say. 3 out of 10 women struggle with pornography. Nearly 50% of men and women both say that they've experienced an affair at some point in their lives. That's normal when it comes to sexuality. That is what the vast majority of people do. What about parenting? The average parent spends 38.5 minutes with their kid every week. So it's 40 minutes. The average parent spends 40 minutes of time with their child in a meaningful conversation every week. I shouldn't say they spend 38 minutes with them every week. They spend 38 minutes of meaningful conversation with their kids every week. But also the average American watches 35 hours of television per week. Do you see the disparity there? What's normal when it comes to finances? Massive amounts of debt, wanting more, not being satisfied with what you have. The average American family owes $16,000 in credit card debt. And that's just credit card debt. That's not consumer credit. That's not mortgages. That's just credit card debt. What about our outlook and our happiness? Well, 1 in 4 people in the United States experience some sort of diagnosable mental disorder. 9 of 10 women are unhappy with the way that they look, their body image. That's an alarming statistic. Normal is completely not the place to be, yet so many Christians continue to live like the world around them because that's the normal thing. Well, everybody else, this is how you do it. This is how people do it. Instead of ever asking, could I get off of this hamster wheel, and could my life look a little bit different? So with that being said, if you don't want to embrace a lifestyle of normal, well, then you have to do things differently. If you want what normal people have, do what normal people do. If you don't want what normal people have, well, then choose to do something differently. Now, Jesus addressed this thought. This is Matthew 7:13-14. He says, enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it. So Jesus says this, the wide path is the path that so many people go down because it's normal. It's what everybody else is doing. They're just walking down the normal path. This is the interstate. Everybody's just buzzing down this path. He says in verse 14, though, because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. In other words, there are a few people willing to say, you know what? I don't think I'm going to go down the normal path like everybody else does. So most people find comfort in doing what others are doing. So that wide gate looks mighty, mighty appealing, living like the world around us. So again, if you want what normal people have, then do what normal people do. But the Apostle Paul comes along and he weighs in Romans chapter 12. This is verse 2. He says, don't be conformed to this world, but instead be transformed. Now, what's Paul saying here? If I could just paraphrase, he's saying, don't be normal. Don't look like everybody else. Don't do the same things that other people do. Christ has called your life to look different. He talked to the children of Israel, and he said, you are a nation set apart. And he would say the same thing to us as Christians, that we are to be set apart, called out, different looking. Now, of course, we're going to be part of the world in the sense that we are amongst other people. We are amongst non-Christians. That's to be encouraged. We should be a light shining in the darkness. That's what evangelism is. It's talking to other people about your faith. But we should not be of the world. That is, we should not look like the rest of the world and do the same things that the world do, the same things that the world does. And so Romans 12:2, he says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. In other words, the Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians 3:18 that we are to be transformed into the image of Christ. And, Jesus was anything but normal. Jesus said things that made people scratch their heads. He says, you've heard it said that you shouldn't commit adultery. That's what we say. That's what we hear. That's what the Old Testament says. Jesus, you're right. Well, Jesus says, I'm telling you this, if you've even committed lust in your heart with another woman, then you have in fact committed adultery. Jesus said this, that the last shall be first and the first shall be last. That's not normal. Normal is to put yourself first and your needs first, right? Normal is Jesus said to forgive your enemies. Normal is I'm not going to forgive my enemies. I'm going to do just as much damage to them as they've done to me. And Jesus said, forgive people. Forgive people. After they've done me so wrong, I'm not forgiving anyone. So Scripture takes us off of that wide path that everybody's trucking down, and it places us on this incredibly narrow path. Jesus tells us instead of following, what everyone else is doing, we should be going the opposite way and not just simply falling in line. 1 Peter 1:15-16 reminds us that we have been called to be anything but normal. It says this. It says, because it is written, be holy, for I am holy. The normal culture we are immersed in just pushes us to be like everybody else. And honestly, to not think critically about anything, just to believe it because that's what you've been told. But again, I think it's pretty evident that the way the world functions does not work. It is not effective. And so we should lean in to what Christ has to tell us. So how do we look different than the rest of the world? The Apostle Paul says it in Romans 12. And we have to change the way that we think. If we're going to be different, we can't think like normal people think. If you think like normal people think, you act like normal people act. He says, Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and the perfect will of God. Now, this is something I learned in psychology years ago. You become what you think about. We have to allow God to change the way we think and to dwell on, what is good, holy, pure, true, just. And that renews and changes our minds. I love the way the Message paraphrases this. I don't love the Message translation overall, but they get this verse so good. It says, don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God, and you'll be changed from the inside out. So many Christians have become adjusted to their culture that they slide right in without thinking about it. What a shame. And so my question for you is this: are you so well adjusted? Fit in. Everybody, sees you as just another person doing the 9 to 5, living their life. Have become so well adjusted to culture that we don't even think about how counter-cultural we should be as Christians. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and what is acceptable and what is the perfect will of God. So we have to think about things differently than other people do. That's a requirement. Also, if we're going to be different, then we can't live like normal people live. So the first thing was our thinking has to change. The second thing is how we live our lives also has to change. Let's go back to 1 Peter. This is 2, verse 11. He says, Beloved, I beg you as a sojourners and pilgrims. Now, why does he call us sojourners and pilgrims? To remind us that this world isn't our home. We're passing through here, so don't get too comfortable. Because when you go camping, you set up a tent, it's a home away from home. You have just what you need to enjoy your time there, and then you go back to the luxuries of your home. That's what Paul's saying. What you have here, you just set up a tent, and you're enjoying your time here. Don't get too comfortable, because your home is in heaven. He says, Beloved, I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims to abstain from fleshly lusts which war against your soul. Again, this isn't your home, so why live like everybody else? He says, verse 12, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. So those outside the faith and those inside the faith should observe our lives as being different. And if there's one thing I feel like I need to be, and there's one thing I feel like Christians in the United States and really around the world need to do differently, it's to live a life that is called apart, that is set apart from the world around us. I think that has to happen as Christians. That we love like Christ has said to love, that we think like Christ has said to think, that we live like Christ has said to live. And so I want to ask you, here's your challenge for Midweek Check-In and Challenge. Are there any areas of your life that are still normal? That is to say, when it comes to my family, and is my family in the way that I relate to my family like the rest of the world? What about your finances? When it comes to your finances, are you just in gobs of debt and mismanaging and not being a good steward of your money? What about your spiritual life? Normal is just to go to church on Sunday and that's it. That's all you do. Is that what you're doing? Are you actively involved in your church? Are you living out Christian principles throughout the week? Are you sharing your faith with other people? What about your private life? For a lot of people, my private life's my private life, and it's none of your business. Well, God knows your private life. What are you thinking about? How are you spending your time? Is that area of your life pleasing to the Lord? It's time that we don't look like the rest of the world around us, and that we look so much different. And so that's your midweek check-in and challenge. Number one, what you learned during the coronavirus crisis. Hope you haven't forgotten it. What God spoke to you in a time of stillness, I hope you carry it back into quote-unquote normal. And then also, as Christians, our lives should look different. We should be different people. And so, church, we love you. We're praying for you. Lord willing, we'll see you in church on Sunday. Have a good rest of the week.